The screen is still on. You haven't moved in 4 minutes. The number in the third column, the one you've been tracking since April, the one you told yourself would stabilize, would flatten, would do what the model said it would do, has not flattened. It has not stabilized. It has moved again, and the direction it has moved is the direction that means the thing you spent 11 months telling yourself was a worst-case outlier is not an outlier. Outside, Boulder is asleep. Someone's porch light is on across the street. The world looks exactly like it did this morning. The number does not. 11 months earlier, the job was not supposed to be this job. You took the position at the NOAA Atmospheric Research Center in Boulder because it was methodical and it was honest and it paid enough to cover the apartment on Mapleton and the dog and the student loans. And because your graduate advisor told you that real science was not glamorous and that being the person who cleaned the data was more important than being the person who presented it, and you believed him. The work was pattern recognition. Incoming satellite feeds from 8 Arctic monitoring stations, Svalbard, Tixi, Prudhoe Bay, the offshore Siberian Shelf Array, cross-referenced against atmospheric methane concentration data from NOAA's Global Flask Network, 150 sites worldwide, updated every 96 hours. You checked the deltas, you flagged anomalies, you filed weekly summaries to a distribution list of 43 people, most of whom you had never met. The apartment on Mapleton had good light in the mornings. The dog, a 9-year-old lab mix named after a minor character in a book you read in graduate school, slept directly on your feet while you worked, which meant you never left the desk as fast as you planned to. You had a plant on the windowsill that you were surprised to discover you were keeping alive. You had a sister in Portland who called on Sundays and complained about her commute, and sometimes sent you links to apartments in her neighborhood. As a form of argument, you both pretended it was not an argument. It was, by any reasonable measure, a manageable life. The first anomaly appeared in the Siberian shelf data on a Wednesday in late April. Methane flux readings from the East Siberian or Arctic Shelf, the shallow continental shelf system, holding an estimated 1,700 gigatons of methane in frozen clathrate deposits beneath the seafloor. We're running 14% above the prior 30-day average. Not unusual on its own. Shelf readings spiked. They corrected. The models had wide error bands for the early season variation, and April was an early season. You flagged it, filed it, went home. The dog was on your feet by 8:15. What you noticed and did not flag, because you were not sure it was worth flagging yet, was that the reading had not come down by Friday. By the following Wednesday, it was 19% above baseline. By the end of May, it was 23%, and the correction had not come. There is a man named Dr. Yevgeny Sorokin on the Tixi monitoring station roster. A Russian atmospheric chemist, collaborative partner under the joint Arctic Data Exchange Agreement signed in 2019, listed on your distribution list as Contact 17 of 43. You have never spoken to him. You know from his CV, which NOAA keeps on file for all collaborative researchers, that he was born in Norilsk, that he did his postdoctoral work at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven, and that he has been stationed at Tixi on the Laptov seacoast for the better part of 6 years. You know, because he attaches brief field notes to his data uploads, and you have been reading them for 2 years, that he measures the temperature outside every morning by opening the station door and holding a thermometer at arm's length before his coffee, because he does not trust the automated sensor and never has. His field note from May 9th, uploaded with a 96-hour data packet, 6 lines, in the terse technical English of someone who learned the language from scientific papers, read, "Sea ice out early, earlier than I have seen. The soil at the station perimeter is soft, where it was not soft in May before. I will recheck the flux sensors on the eastern array. I do not think the sensors are the problem." You read that note on a Thursday morning with the dog on your feet and the plant on the windowsill and the coffee still too hot to drink, and you did not call your supervisor. You told yourself you would wait for the next data packet. The next data packet came in at 27% above baseline. By June, you knew. Not suspected it. Knew. What you were watching was not a sensor error and not early season variation and not a modeling artifact. It was a feedback loop that the models had categorized as a tail risk scenario with a probability ceiling of 3% before 2080. It was happening now, in the data, in the third column of a spreadsheet open on your desk in Boulder, Colorado, while your dog slept on your feet and the plant on the windowsill continued improbably to live. The loop works like this, and you know it, the way you know your own address, the way you know which step on the stairs creaks. The Arctic warms faster than anywhere else on the planet, 4 times faster. A documented measured phenomenon called Arctic amplification. As surface temperatures rise, the permafrost thaws. As the permafrost thaws, it releases methane stored inside it. Methane frozen there since the Pleistocene, since before the last ice age, methane that is not carbon recently pulled from the atmosphere and resequestered by existing systems, ancient carbon, new to the modern climate, additional. Methane runs 80 times hotter than CO2 as a warming agent over our 20-year horizon. More warming means more thaw. More thaw means more methane. More methane means more warming. The loop has no natural break. Only the rate at which methane oxidizes into CO2 in the upper atmosphere, roughly 12 years, long enough for the loop to run several full cycles before the oxidation catches up. What the models had never agreed on, the variable sitting at the center of every projection's error band like a splinter no one could reach, was the East Siberian Arctic shelf. Unlike terrestrial permafrost, the shelf is submarine. The methane beneath it is not frozen soil, it is frozen water. Methane hydrate. Ice cage gas held in place by cold water pressure. As the ocean warms from below, the pressure cage weakens. The question no model could resolve was whether the release would be gradual, a slow seep over centuries, manageable, absorbable, or episodic, pulse-like, the kind of release that doesn't trend. It erupts. The East Siberian shelf holds enough methane to raise global average temperatures by 1.3 degrees Celsius in a single release event. The models called this a tail risk. The models had also called 27% above baseline a tail risk. By August, the reading was 61% above baseline. The atmospheric flash stations, all 150 of them worldwide, from Mauna Loa to the South Pole Observatory to the station in Tasmania, where a retired schoolteacher volunteers to change the filters twice a week, were beginning to show it. You filed the August summary with a supplementary memo attached. 5 pages. It used the phrase acceleration inconsistent with gradual release models 4 times, and the phrase episodic pulse event twice. And it cited the Sorokin field notes directly, including the line about the soil being soft where it was not soft before. Your supervisor. Doctor. Andrea Marsh. 16 years at NOAA, calm in the way people who have worked in federal science long enough learn to be calm, a kind of practice stillness. Read the memo in front of you, then looked at the window for a moment, then asked if you had run the secondary cross-reference against the GRACE-FO satellite gravimetry data. You had. It confirmed. She told you the memo would go to the Interagency Review Committee. She told you the committee met on the 3rd Tuesday of each month. She told you the data would be in front of the right people by September, and that the process existed for a reason. That preliminary findings bypassing the process had a way of being used incorrectly by people who did not understand their limitations. And that the most dangerous version of this data was not data that arrived late. It was data that arrived early and wrong, and then spent 3 years being relitigated instead of acted on. She was not wrong. That was the problem. You drove home, sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes before going inside. The dog met you at the door. Not quite worried, not quite relieved. It's something that only exists in that specific animal context, a form of presence with no human name for it. You sat on the floor with him for a while, didn't eat until late. The plant on the windowsill had a new leaf. What the Interagency Committee did not know, what you had not put in the memo yet, because you were not sure it was real, because you had run the projection in 3 different ways, and kept getting the same answer, and kept telling yourself there was a variable you were missing, was the cascade, not the methane alone, what the methane was doing to everything else. In July, for the first time in the 45-year record, all 5 major climate systems regulating global monsoon circulation had simultaneously registered anomalous readings in the same directional shift. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation weakened, the Indian Ocean dipole inverted, the Pacific decadal oscillation negative phase, the West African monsoon onset delayed 17 days, the South Asian monsoon withdrawal early by 12. Any one of these was a bad year. 2 together had happened before. 3 was the 2010 to 2011 sequence. The Russian wheat failure, the Horn of Africa drought, the food price spike that was one proximate cause of the Arab Spring, all 5, simultaneously, trending the same direction. You had run the agricultural impact model twice and gotten the same output and then sat very still for a while. 14 months to simultaneous failure threshold across 3 primary global breadbasket regions. You put the projection in a folder, labeled it with a date, went back to work. The screen is still on. 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, and the number in the third column has moved again. The draft report is open in a second window. You've had it open for 6 weeks, updated every 96 hours as new data packets came in, each update moving the projection in the same direction with the same certainty, the error bands narrowing rather than widening. Narrowing error bands mean the model is not uncertain anymore. They mean it's confident. The Interagency Committee met in September and in October. The data went through review. Dr. Marsh was right that the process existed for a reason and wrong. Not about the process, but about the time it would take. Because the process was designed for a world where data moved at the speed of institutional consideration, and this data was not doing that. By November, atmospheric methane concentration had crossed 2.1 parts per million for the first time in the 800,000-year ice core record. By December, the global mean temperature anomaly for the year sat at 1.87 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline. Not a monthly record, not a seasonal record. The annual record, broken by a margin that made the previous record look like it belonged to a different planet. By February, 4 of the 5 climate system indicators had crossed the thresholds the model had identified as cascade initiation. The committee had produced a draft summary document under secondary review. Going to the interagency principles in April, you have the report. Right now, in this window, on this screen, in this building where you are the only person still here, parking lot empty, porch light across the street still on, the rest of Boulder asleep, the report is complete. Confirmed by your own secondary analysis, by the Sorokin data, by the Flask network, by the Graystash FO gravimetry, by a methodology appendix 40 pages long that will hold up against any technical challenge made by anyone with the credentials to make one. 6 email addresses sit in a draft message, not the committee, not the interagency chain. 6 people. A director at USDA with authority over the Strategic Grain Reserve, a deputy minister of agriculture in India whose address you got through a mutual contact, someone you've never met, a senior program officer at the World Food Program in Rome, a congressional staffer on the Senate Agriculture Committee who responded to your last query letter in 36 hours and clearly understood what you were describing, and 2 climate scientists whose names appear in the published literature so often they function as institutional anchors. 6 people who, if they receive this data, can begin moving things before the window closes. Dr. Marsh told you to wait 72 hours. Secondary confirmation is scheduled for Thursday. The data will not change. You know what Thursday will show because you've been running the same confirmation protocol yourself for 6 weeks, and the answer hasn't shifted once. The hold isn't about the data. It's about the liability protocol, the interagency agreement. The fact that an unauthorized release of preliminary federal scientific data violates your security clearance agreement and possibly 3 statutes whose specific language you looked up at 9 p.m. and read twice. And it's about the other thing, the thing Marsh said that wasn't wrong, that preliminary data released outside the process becomes a story about the release, not a story about the data. That if you send this tonight, the first 48 hours are about a rogue NOAA analyst, about scientific legitimacy, political motivation, everything except the third column and what it means, that you hand the people who most need this data to be wrong a weapon to use against it. She wasn't wrong about that either. 14 months to simultaneous failure threshold, minus the 8 months already gone since you first ran the model. The cursor's on the send button. The draft is open. The 6 addresses are there. You think about the Sorokin field note. I do not think the sensors are the problem. You think about 2.1 parts per million crossing in November, while the committee was producing a draft summary document. You think about 14 months that are now 6 and still going. You think about what it means to protect the process versus protecting the outcome the process exists to produce, and whether there's a version of this where those are the same thing, and whether you know the difference right now, even if there were. Your hands are on the keyboard. The building is quiet. The porch light across the street is still on. You think about the plant on the windowsill, your sister in Portland. You think briefly about Tixie, the Laptov seacoast, the station door, a thermometer held at arm's length before the coffee. and the soil soft where it was not soft before. The cursor is on send. You look at the 6 addresses. You look at the 72-hour hold. You look at the number in the third column. 6 months. You move the cursor away from send. You open a new window. Pull up Dr. Marsh's direct line. Not email, her cell. The number she gave you your first week and told you was for emergencies only. 11:52 p.m. You have never used it. 41 words. You say the secondary confirmation window needs to close now, tonight, and that you'll explain the calculation when she calls back, and that you think she'll agree with it when she sees it, and that you're asking her to look at the data before Thursday, not after. You send the message. You sit back. The building is still quiet. The screen is still on. The numbers in the third column has not changed. You don't know if she'll respond tonight. You don't know if the 72-hour hold becomes 48 or 24 or nothing. You don't know if the 6 people with the 6 addresses will receive the report through the proper channel in time for the proper channel to matter. And you don't know. This is the thing you've been sitting with for 6 weeks, whether the process will move at the speed the data requires, or whether you just made the decision to let it try, whether that's the same as doing nothing, whether doing nothing was the only way to protect the thing that might eventually do something. The cursor sits on the open draft. The 6 addresses are still there. You leave it open, you don't close it. At some point, you're not sure when, the dog has moved. He's no longer under the desk. He's beside your chair, not pressed against it, just beside it the way he does when he's decided you need company but doesn't want to make it obvious. The porch light across the street goes off. Boulder is dark now. The draft is open and the number in the third column is what it is. You put one hand on the dog. He doesn't move. Somewhere above the building, in the atmosphere you've spent 3 years learning to read like a second language, the methane is doing what it does. Regardless of the draft window, the interagency hold, whatever you decide in the next 60 seconds. It doesn't wait for secondary confirmation. It doesn't observe the liability protocol. The question sitting in this room, the one that'll still be here when you leave, whether that's in 5 minutes or 5 hours, isn't whether the data is right. You know the data is right. The question is what it means that you know, and whether knowing obligates you to something specific, or whether knowing and acting correctly while inside the system are the same thing. Whether staying inside it was a choice you made, or the only choice that left you. The draft is open, you haven't closed it yet.